I recently had a conversation with Lilith about the whole don't say gay thing that's happening right now. No, not in the Tubcast, this was an offline talk. Being trans, she took up the unapologetically pro-trans position, which I don't completely agree with. I'm not faulting her for it. It's an issue close to her heart. I might be the same way if I were in her shoes, but I wanted to look at the topic as objectively as I can. And, spoiler alert, yeah, we're going to discover that neither side is exactly correct. So, let's get into it. Florida's Parental Rights and Education Act, labeled as the Don't Say Gay Bill by its critics, is a recently passed law that outlines new statutes for primary education insofar as sexual orientation and gender identity is concerned. The bill prohibits the discussion of these topics in a classroom setting from kindergarten to grade 3. That's 9 years old. Naturally, this topic has got everybody's panties in a bunch. Leftoids are screaming that this is homophobic and transphobic, and it's going to result in the deaths of trans kids. Rightoids are screeching that this is necessary because the school system is inundated with LGBT groomers who are pushing trans ideology onto impressionable children. The funny thing is, everyone could just calm down and go read the bill and figure it out for themselves. It's not some omnibus legislation that's over 9,000 pages. It's 7 pages long. I'll leave it in the description if you want to read it yourself, but let's go over the pertinent points. The first point of contention is paragraph 3. Paragraphs 1 and 2 are basically blanket statements that schools have an obligation to inform parents about a change in a student's health, and for the most part, leave those health-related decisions in the hands of parents. Paragraph 3 reads, classroom instruction by school personnel or third parties on sexual orientation or gender identity may not occur in kindergarten through grade 3 or in a manner that is not age-appropriate or developmentally appropriate for students in accordance with state standards. That's it. This is the bit of the legislation that went viral, that discussions on sexual orientation or gender identity can't happen at all before grade 4. This is what opponents of the bill are calling Don't Say Gay. So, let's examine their criticisms. Firstly, there's the moniker, Don't Say Gay. Nothing in the wording of this bill mentions gay or homosexual. It just says sexual orientation. That also means that you could just as easily call it the Don't Say Straight bill. The immediate counter-argument to this is that heterosexuality is pretty normalized in society over homosexuality, even now. And yeah, that's true, but it's also a necessary part of being a reproducing species. Young kids might not know what sex is, but for example, they'll be in the grocery store with their parents and see other heterosexual couples with their kids together. Heterosexuality is common and necessary, so it does naturally lead to an early understanding of the idea, even if they don't know about sex. And it's also very common to see situations like a kid sees a teacher with his wedding photo on his desk and asks about it, and the teacher says that's his wife. Or a situation where a kid overhears their young female teacher saying to a colleague that she's going on a date that night, and all the kids go, ooh, like dumb kids do. This is all stuff I'm sure we can remember happening. None of it's bad. It's all normal, even positive behavior. And it's all predicated on at least a basic understanding of heterosexuality, even though at that age, kids wouldn't use that word to describe it. These normal behaviors might be made illegal under this bill, and I don't think it's a good thing. Secondly, a lot of progressives view the second half of paragraph 3 to be the weasel words that allow schools to blanket ban all talk of sexuality. Those words are, or in a manner that is not age-appropriate or developmentally appropriate for students in accordance with state standards. The obvious question here is, who is to say what is age-appropriate or developmentally appropriate? What if the powers that be are all a bunch of pearl-clutching Christian moms who don't want their 17-year-olds to be taught about the existence of sex? That seems kind of ridiculous to me, doesn't it? Well, this is a wider issue. It's with the very concept of law. Almost every law, if you dig deep enough, has a bit written into it where it says, as a reasonable person would consider, or whatever. And the argument can always be made, who defines what's reasonable? The person who views all hierarchies as corrupt and all interactions between people as games of dominance will say that it's clearly power that defines what's reasonable. Clearly, this opens the door for arbitrary prosecution based on politics. And maybe that's the case. But the reason laws are necessarily written like this is because legally, every term needs to be defined. And then every term within the definition also needs to be defined. And etc., all the way down, until you realize that language has no solid foundation, and all of its borders are necessarily fuzzy, and it's all arbitrary anyway. But nonetheless, we are grasping at real concepts here. We are creating labels that map onto these concepts as accurately as we can, and we still need language and laws. So the whole, come on man, you know what I mean clause is pretty common, and its presence doesn't automatically constitute a valid criticism. So, that being the case, let's look at what those state standards that age-appropriate or developmentally appropriate is in accordance with. Here's the CDC's report on the status of sexual education in Florida. Local education agencies have the authority to choose or approve curriculum for sexual health education instruction. The option to either opt in or opt out of sexual health education, HIV prevention, and STD prevention is not addressed. Instruction regarding contraception is not addressed. Abstinence is a required topic of instruction for sexual health education, HIV prevention, and STD prevention. The core topics addressed in Florida law are sexual health education, HIV prevention, and STD prevention, though those are permitted by law, not required. At first glance, this reads like there's just no sex ed at all in Florida, but that's not necessarily the case. According to CSIS, which is a sex ed advocacy group, sex ed is not currently mandated in Florida. Schools that do teach sex ed must emphasize abstinence as the expected social standard. Since Florida schools are not required to provide sex ed to students, school districts are left to decide what type of sex ed, if any, they provide to youth. While some districts, such as Putnam County, mandate comprehensive sex ed, others, such as St. Johns County, mandate abstinence-only instruction. Regardless of how advanced a particular district's curriculum may be, state statute mandates that HIV and AIDS instruction emphasize the benefits of heterosexual marriage. So it seems to me that Florida isn't banning sex ed, it's just that the state government is being hands-off on the topic, with the only mandate being, if you're going to talk about preventing STDs, you need to bring up heterosexuality and abstinence. And I mean, fair enough. I mentioned in my addictions video that being able to adhere to abstinence is ultimately the problem, and that if you can, abstinence obviously works. And this analysis tracks with the CDC's report. The laws make no mention, either positive or negative, either mandating or banning trained instructors teaching sex ed, a unified curriculum following federal standards, or medical accuracy, all things that I'm sure leftoids don't like. But the laws also make no mention of, either positive or negative, either mandating or banning, parents being allowed to be involved in the review or approval of the curriculum, age appropriateness of the curriculum, or a stance on practical instruction, all things that I'm sure rightoids don't like. Florida's sex ed laws are something you'd expect of a more libertarian, hands-off type of approach, where their position on everything from accuracy of education, to standardization of education, to parental ability to opt in or opt out, to age appropriateness is all just, fuck it, let the school boards decide. CSIS, being a progressive mechanism, isn't happy with this laid-back approach, and they say it's going to harm LGBTQ and marginalized youth. But that's to be expected since that's their political slant. I don't know if this decentralized vision actually helps or hurts, but the point is, when the Don't Say Gay bill relies on state standards, the state standard seems to mostly be the school boards decide this shit, not us. So, using those two CSIS examples, when it comes to teaching about sexual orientation or gender identity, Putnam County might consider age-appropriate or developmentally appropriate to begin at grade 4, since that's the minimum that the bill allows, while St. Johns County might think it's appropriate to not discuss these topics at all, regardless of age. In other words, if there's any don't say gaying actually happening, it's not directly by the state of Florida, it's by the local school boards. The third point of contention is paragraph 5 in the bill. At the beginning of the school year, each school district shall notify the parents of each healthcare service offered at their student's school, and the option to withhold consent or decline any specific service. This enshrines the right of a parent to be notified about sex ed and have the option to opt out, something that wasn't in Florida law before, as we saw in that CDC analysis. Some progs hate this because they believe that kids should be forced to take sex ed regardless of how the parents feel about it, which I generally don't think is right. At the same time, I can see their point of view. There are some really shitty parents out there who shelter their kids or teach them factually incorrect stuff, or abuse them, and sometimes school is the privacy away from the parent that the kid needs. Both parents and the government can misuse the authority they have over children. The question seems to be, if misused, which has worse consequences? During the most developmental years, parents can absolutely royally fuck up a kid for the rest of their lives. But as they get older, especially into the double digits, I would say that it's the government, for the sole fact that at least with the parents, you can cut them off if you have to. You can't do that with the state. The fourth complaint is about paragraph 7. This is pretty long, so basically, 7 reads that parents have a mechanism to complain to the school, and that complaint must be replied to within 7 days. After 30 days, if the complaint isn't resolved, the parent has the right to arbitration by a magistrate or can bring a court action against the school district. A lot of progs are saying that this allows parents to sue the school for teaching their kid about the gays, but that's not fully accurate. Remember, paragraph 5 allows parents to have their child opt out of sex education. Paragraph 7, meanwhile, allows parents to complain and have that complaint considered. So, let's say that a parent has decided that their kid isn't going to be taught sex ed, and they opt out as per paragraph 5. That parent can only file a complaint under paragraph 7 if the school went behind their backs and taught the kids sex ed anyway. And that parent can only pursue damages if the school ignored their complaint. Parents cannot go after schools for teaching sex ed to everyone, because paragraph 5 limits the scope of a parent's control to only their own children. So if some dumb Karen wanted not only her precious baby to not be in sex ed, but wanted the school to stop offering sex ed for everyone, she'd be shit out of luck. And if she filed a complaint under paragraph 7, properly resolving the complaint would constitute the school board telling her to go pound sand. The fifth problem is that I've heard some people on the left also say that the options for relief under paragraph 8 mark new territory, that parents could not sue schools for this sort of thing before. That's just not true. And in fact, up here in Canada, we make fun of how sue-happy Americans are, especially when it comes to schools. In 2012, parents in California sued a school district over only offering abstinence-only education, wanting more options for sex ed for their kids. In 2005, parents in Maryland sued to stop discussions about homosexuality in sex ed, as well as the screening of a video showing how to properly properly put a condom on. In 2010, a mother in Montana sued the school due to sex ed there involving kindergarteners through grade 3 learning about human anatomy and 5th grade students learning about different types of sexual activity. Hell, back in 1994 this shit was happening. This isn't anything new. Sixth, a lot of progs are also worried that involving parents in their children's education this much will mean that the kids who are legitimately gay or trans will be hurt by the system, as the teachers and school staff will have an obligation to inform the parents about the status of their children's health. So if you're a closeted gay kid and your homophobic parents would disown you or beat you or kill you if they knew, yeah, that's actually a real concern. And the progs believe that this bill will empower those parents in the abuse of their children and force schools to become an accomplice to it. But that's because even though the bill is only 7 pages, the progs still never bothered to read it. In paragraph 2, that paragraph I skipped over earlier, that outlines the parents' right to be informed about their kids' health, has a clause for just such an occasion. This subparagraph does not prohibit a school district from adopting procedures that permit school personnel to withhold such information from a parent if a reasonably prudent person would believe that disclosure would result in abuse, abandonment, or neglect. Again, we've got the reasonably prudent person problem here, but this seems like a pretty concrete protection. And finally, there's the "it's good when we do it" argument. It's good to go against the consent of parents, to sneak around and keep things in the dark. It's good to teach kids about this stuff even if their parents don't want it, because it hurts trans kids to not know that they're trans. And maybe, fair enough. While I do think that the massive inflation of numbers of trans people can be genuinely chalked up to trans trenders right now, there are absolutely a small minority of people who are really trans from birth, and it would likely make their lives a lot better if they knew what that was at a young age. The issue is, though, nobody trusts these teachers with political agendas to be neutral arbiters of the topic. In fact, we know that they're not. That's literally what "it's good when we do it" means. It is normal, expected, and reasonable for conservative parents to not trust the blue-haired, non-binary teachers dancing and singing about how they're converting children on libs of TikTok. Just like it would be normal, accepted, and reasonable for the progs to not trust conservative teachers in a world where separation of church and state was abolished and suddenly gay kids had to attend a totally neutral Bible study class. So no, I personally don't think that Florida's "Don't Say Gay" bill is a huge problem. It does have a few areas where things are vague enough that somebody with a bad agenda could use it improperly. But the general request of "don't teach kids this gender ideology shit until they hit the double digits" seems to be reasonable to me. And on the one hand, the reaction to this has been histrionic. We just lost the ability to exist in an entire state before age 19. What the fuck are you talking about? These schools will still have gay and trans kids. They're just not going to be taught about it by teachers until grade 4. Slow your fucking roll. People are also trying to link that gay bar that burned down in Brooklyn to the "don't say gay" thing, spinning a narrative that anti-gay and anti-trans violence is on the rise, and that society is going to start mass oppressing adults again for doing what they want with their lives and bodies. To me, I don't see the correlation. I don't think that there's actually a connection between teaching children about sexuality at inappropriate ages and consenting sexual behavior between adults. And personally, I would have to wonder about the person who does. LA County bans official travel to Florida over the "don't say gay" law. This is official travel, mind you, meaning state-sponsored travel. Private citizens can continue to evacuate California as it sinks into the ocean, don't worry. But yeah, this is ultra fucking stupid. Even using the phrase "don't say gay" is stupid, because it's just another leftoid strawman of what's going on, just like every other slogan, every other Mott and Bailey. Nobody said "don't say gay," just like nobody said that black lives don't matter or that trans people don't have rights. At the same time, we cannot pretend that everything that the left is currently screaming about is completely unfounded. As I mentioned in the concept creep video, parents are currently calling for the head of a gay teacher who casually mentioned he was taking time off to get married. And when asked about his soon-to-be wife by his students, he said he was going to have a husband, actually. Literally, the reasonable example I mentioned early in this video of completely acceptable mentioning of homosexuality to children, yeah, there are parents who are complaining about it now, and that's ridiculous. The article reporting on this story actually describes 3 different stories. The first is of Robert Thallander, a 6th grade teacher, who is the one that I talked about. The parents claim that marrying a man is not the issue, but sharing the details with his students is. The parents never described what details he shared, but Thallander said he never went beyond casually mentioning it. To me, the parents are wrong, and according to the information that we have, this is pretty unacceptable. Case 2, Nicolette Solomon, a lesbian, who said, "The law would erase me as an LGBTQ teacher. Nobody would be able to know, which then puts me in the closet. And I'm there 7 hours a day, if not more, 5 days a week. I wouldn't be able to be who I am." The question is, what constitutes who you are that you can't do while you're teaching math or English or whatever? What vital experience would you be missing? What avenue would be closed off to you? Is it like Thallander's case, where you'd feel afraid of displaying a picture of your girlfriend on your desk, or appropriately answering questions about your life? If so, fair enough, but this story seems a bit vague to me. Case 3, Brian Kirkes, a gay man who asks his students for their preferred pronouns at the beginning of every year, whose class has a safe space sign and a pride flag, and who says, our students need to see that the educators in their community are as diverse as the rest of the community. They need educators that look and resemble them. Yeah, you might be the kind of person that conservative parents are worried about, dude. It's interesting to me that the article lumps in these three people as if they're in the same boat. You've got one person who is openly advocating this ideology in defiance of the law and potentially the wishes of the parents. You've got one person who is very vague about what's going on, what they want, and what they're doing. And then you've got one person who is actually being unfairly treated due to the overzealousness of parents. These are not the same situations. And emboldened by the Don't Say Gay bill and the discourse surrounding it, other events are also being set into motion. Doctors in Florida have all received this letter from the Florida Health Department, informing them that under no circumstances should anybody under 18 receive any transitioning treatment, including puberty blockers, hormone therapy, any form of surgery, or even socially living as the other gender. For all of those trans trenders I mentioned earlier, this could actually probably help them out quite a bit. But for those few legitimate trans people, we do know that passing is easier if you start earlier. The question that makes transitioning legitimate is, are you actually trans? And there's just not enough trust in the integrity and neutrality of the people who are meant to ask that question right now. In fact, it's considered transphobic to ask that question right now, which is just ridiculous. Meanwhile, Alabama has decided to make it a felony for healthcare workers to help transition anybody below 19, not 18. Idaho has made it a life sentence to help transition anybody under 18, and has also made it a felony for people to go to another state and then transition there. In Missouri, there's currently a push to ban transitioning until the age of 25.
Into this until their brains are fully developed at age 25 to comprehend the dramatic and drastic and irreparable changes to their bodies.
Well, and that's something that I believe I've discussed in committee previously, and I know when we had criminal justice reform such as raise the age, I think Republicans and Democrats both agreed when we passed that the brains of especially males are still developing into their 20s, and I don't understand why that's not part of the discussion herein.
This to me is absolutely ridiculous. At 25, the state should shut its mouth about what you want to do with your body, period. It's also important to note that most of these pieces of legislation have exemptions built in for intersex people. So if you're born with one of the various deformities that constitutes intersex, you can still get surgery and hormones as required to live as normally as possible. A lot of trans activism likes to rely on intersex issues as a talking point, but trans people are not intersex. I've heard from multiple people that the Don't Say Gay bill is the tip of the iceberg, and there's actually 240 anti-trans bills right now being debated. I don't know where that number comes from, but I've heard it a lot. What I do know, though, is that there's a Twitter account called Trans Bill Tracker, which is posting all of the various anti-trans legislation working its way through the system right now. Some of it is, to me, reasonable stuff, like legislation regarding gender segregation in school sports. Some of the legislation is stuff related to paperwork and IDs, like banning non-binary from being used on an official state ID card. And on this account, insofar as Don't Say Gay related stuff is concerned, we can see copycat bills like Oklahoma following suit and banning classroom instruction on sexual identity and gender expression from kindergarten to grade 5. To be honest, I could sit here and scroll through this account for a while and I could probably find bills I disagree with, bills I agree with, and bills I just don't care about. Maybe this is where that 240 number comes from. In any case, though, there does seem to be a rise of legislation that goes against the LGBT agenda. But that's because that political agenda is not universally good or correct or even supported by people. The trans lobby is not always right on every single thing all the time. The big problem here is what I said earlier. If transness is an immutable characteristic, and for the legitimate trans people I think it is, that is something that you know from a very young age. The legitimate trans experience, as I've had it described to me by several trans people now, is one where, for as long as they can remember, there's been something very wrong with them. And as puberty began, it was accompanied not just with confusion, or questions, or weird new feelings, but a deep disgust with one's own body, with what they're becoming, and how it intuitively doesn't feel like what they should be on some fundamental level. That's a completely different experience than people who are fine with who they are, but think it would be cool to be the other gender for aesthetic purposes. The former is doing it because it's the best way we currently know how to alleviate their dysphoric symptoms. The latter is doing it because it's fun and cool, and the thing that nets you the most social points online right now. It's pretty clear which of the two I personally have no respect for. The issue is, restricting transitioning even to 18 makes the lives of that tiny population of real trans people significantly harder. At the same time, it also provides a bulwark against ideologically possessed teachers from pushing people who are trans trenders, or people who are borderline, people who are just confused, into a medical procedure that actually isn't for them, and in fact will be quite harmful to them. The issue is that people just don't trust these teachers anymore. If we lived in a world where politics were taken out of it on both sides, and transitioning was only talked about as a medical treatment for people with legitimate dysphoria, and it was otherwise off the table, then maybe the larger public would trust the procedure. But we don't live in that world. The trust in the teachers or in the system is not present, and as such we are seeing legislative remedies with potential bad side effects, all because the people in these positions of power have taken it upon themselves to push a political agenda onto children, and examining that agenda will be the topic of the next video.